Welcome to the show. It's the Paul Porter Show, News Talk 1240 WFOI and Channel 22 QXT, and we're here every day 3 to 5 on the radio, and 6 p.m., 11 p.m., and 7 a.m. on Channel 22, your local TV station. Well, we've got, it's the healthcare thing has gotten so crazy now. Naturally, the liberal media is calling it bending the rules. Not breaking the rules, not totally just violating the Constitution of the United States. No, according to Time magazine, it's bending the rules. And bending the rules means that somehow they're trying to figure out a way to pass legislation without a vote. Now, that seems to be in violation of the Constitution. In fact, you just kind of wonder, how they plan on passing legislation without a vote. Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 7 says, every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate, blah, blah, blah. But in all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each house respectively. Kind of very, those of us that believe in the Constitution believe that the guys that wrote it in such simple, clear language. But that's, you can't subvert the Constitution unless you read everything in a way that isn't clear at all. Like the Second Amendment, which says, that states are allowed to have militias or, organized militias, comma. And so everybody has a right to bear arms to protect ourselves from those organized militias. How easy is that to figure out? But, Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution says votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays and the names of the persons voting. For and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each house respectively. Sounds pretty clear. Well, Time magazine calls it bending the rules when the House leaders are considering a self-executing rule, hoping to save their members from actually voting on the Senate bill. Now, that seems to be totally at odds with the Constitution of the United States. Such a move, according to Time magazine, means the House would pass a rule. The House can just pass a rule in violation of the Constitution, saying if the Senate passes reconciliation, then they'll consider the Senate bill passed. In other words, if B is followed by C, then A will be enacted. But even Time acknowledges there's a little bit of a problem with this strategy because Senate budget, not the Constitution, they don't bring up the Constitution. They don't care about the Constitution. You have to realize, folks, this is a subversion of our country and its form of government. So that isn't the problem Time brings up. Not a little matter like the Constitution of the United States. No, it's Budget Committee Chairman Kent Conrad. He's the problem, saying that the House, whose committee reconciliation must go through, says it's impossible to do fixes on a bill that hasn't already been signed into law. In other words, the House must pass the Senate bill and send it to Obama for his signature before the Senate can take up reconciliation. House and Senate negotiators have appealed to the parliamentarians to decide who is right, and a decision is expected this week. Do you think maybe they ought to go to a little bit higher authority than the parliamentarians of the House and the Senate, which they control in overwhelming numbers, like maybe the Supreme Court of the United States? Maybe they ought to be involved in determining whether something is constitutional. So then Time goes on to say, if you're not already totally confused, there's more. But we're not confused. We know that the media is now backstopping the Democrats to totally subvert the Constitution of the United States to have a socialist takeover of our healthcare system. That's not confusing to me. But Time goes on to say, but if you're confused, there's more. In the Senate, Dems are eyeing Oklahoma Republican Tom Coburn and has promised hundreds of amendments warily. So warily that they're considering an obscure, meaning never been done before, not really within the rules, totally outside the principles, the practices, the rules, the tradition of the Senate. That's what the word obscure would mean in this case. They're considering an obscure procedural tactic some Republicans are labeling the nuclear option, when I always thought reconciliation was the nuclear option. Maybe this should be the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb option. Because under reconciliation rules, even though debate is limited to 20 hours and only 51 votes are needed, there are no limits on amendments. And if Republicans file hundreds of them, the Senate parliamentarian could need months to rule on them all. Democratic leaders could, after a few days of amendments, say that the Republicans are trying to filibuster by amendment. And given that filibusters are not allowed in reconciliation, they could rule all other amendments dilatory and move to final passage. In other words, just totally vacate all the traditions, history, rules, and everything of the Senate of the United States. And again, totally usurp the Constitution and just take our country's healthcare system over and become a socialistic government. Hey, why don't we just all lay down and allow this to happen? Do you think maybe that when the Declaration of Independence says that we have a right to take our country back, do you think maybe that if they do these things, that would qualify? Let's pull that up, because I think the language is very, very specific here. And is it time for us to go to the pitchforks, as they might have said back in France around the reign of Louis and Marie Antoinette? So we're going to try and pull this up on an internet that just never seems to work when you really need it. All right, so we'll delay that, but I think it says that when things get so bad, essentially, that the rule of law disappears, we as citizens have a right to come back and do something about it. And let's, again, pretty soon I won't be here doing this show, and it will just make it so much easier to do the job here. Let's see, I'll be able to just have good internet. Okay, Declaration of Independence. All right, and so we'll kind of check that out, and we would like to look at the text. They have it for kids, but kids don't learn the Declaration of Independence anymore, so I don't know if that particular website gets hit very often. So, even Lindsey Graham and John Kyle are pleading with the administration not to use this new nuclear option. So reconciliation's no longer the nuclear option. That's now going to be okay, I guess. But now can you imagine what would happen if irresponsible presiding officers exercise that power? That's what John Kyle has to say. Pleading with Democrats not to deploy this highly unusual tactic. In other words, decide that amendments are filibustering. Decide that amendments are filibustering. So then the article in Time goes on to say, given all the complex and rarely used machinations, some Dems worry it'll be hard to argue that they aren't ramming health care through. Do you think? Especially if they are forced to use both tactics. On the other hand, the longer this process takes, the less likely they'll pass a bill as elections are approaching. I'm telling you, when we're really vulnerable is after we destroy the Democrats in the 2010 elections and their lame duck and they go back and they pass this health care bill, that's when we're in trouble. So, Time says, for sake of expediency in this final push, Dems may have to sacrifice all bipartisanship, not just to get health care, but everything else also. Yes, let's just take over the country. We'll be right back.